This is like basically a way to do real-time procedural snow. It also works with falling leaves, confetti. All right, so here we are in a fresh scene. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna create this effect in a way that is really lightweight. Sometimes particle systems can take up a lot of memory or be really heavy on your machine. But we're gonna do this with just a simple shader and make it procedural so that you can use it in any scene and have it be really fast and responsive, but still have the same kind of visual quality that you would want out of a more complex particle simulation. I'm going to go into edit mode and I'm going to get rid of the top face. So I'm going to go to face selection mode and select the top face and then select the bottom face and hit X to delete and click faces. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to rendered view. I'm going to click on my camera tab here to go to the render settings. And you can see I've set to Eevee. That's what we'll be using today. And I'm going to come down here to ray tracing and turn that on as well, just to get the most out of it. Let's get some light in our scene by coming up here to this little drop down and turning off scene world. And this will now use one of the built-in HDRIs. We can just leave that set to default. This will just help us see. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the timeline down here, and I'm going to switch this from the timeline to the shader editor. And with my object selected, I can go to the material tab and I can click new here, or I can click new in the shader editor. And you can see it does the same thing. It creates a new shader for our cube. Now, the first thing we want to do is we're going to create a snow pattern on this cube. We're going to use the noise texture to do it. So let's go ahead and go Shift A and type in the search field. We're going to type in noise texture. And we're going to bring it in right here. Now, let's just look at this noise texture and just see what it's doing. I'm going to plug the factor straight into the surface. So I'm going to bypass the principal BSDF node so we can just see the pure values coming out of this noise texture. Now you can see we've got this scale and detail and roughness and stuff. And what we want to do is use this pattern to kind of break up into these little snow-like shapes. So irregular circles, little blobs, and we're going to use those to create our snow effect. So I'm going to create a color ramp so I can shape this a little bit. Okay, so I'll drop the color ramp right on top of this pipe, and then we'll automatically connect up. And now with the color ramp, you can see what I can do is I can drag the black values up, and it's going to start cutting the lower values and make them darker and darker until we start to lose them. And I can bring it all the way up to around here to this position of like 0.68, something like that. And I can bring the white one close, and this will increase the contrast between these, and it will define some shapes. So here we go. So now we've got these little like flecks, right? And this is the basis of our effect and how we're going to make it work. I can take the scale and turn it up or down to change the size of the snow particles. And we can take the detail as well to make them more complex shapes with like rougher edges. You can see we've got these really rough edges when we turn the detail up, or we can turn it way down to get very simple shapes. We're going to keep the detail relatively low. I might put it at maybe 2 for now. I think that looks pretty good. And this is a really good representation of snow, I think, because each snowflake is going to be a little different in shape. They're going to bunch up together, especially when it's that sort of wet snow where it's clumpy and coming down. All right. Now, the next thing we need is for this to be animated. We need it to move. We need it to fall down from the sky. So I need to change the position of this noise texture on the surface of this object. That means I need to use a texture coordinate. So I'm going to hit Shift A and type in texture coordinate. Now, the texture coordinate system is the way that Blender figures out how to place any kind of procedural or 2D image texture onto a 3D surface. And it uses one of these outputs to do it. So the generated is what it's using by default. That's what it's using right now. So if I plug the generated into the vector, you can see that nothing changes. It's because this is what it's doing already by default. But now we're being really explicit with it. We could also use one of these other types as well to try and position it in different ways. And it's worth experimenting with these to see what they look like. Now we want to be able to move this, so we can use the mapping node to do that. So we're going to pull up the mapping node and we can just drop it in here. So what we're going to do with the mapping node is basically just change the location, rotation, or scale that's coming from the texture coordinate. And we're going to change it a little bit before passing it through to the noise texture. And you can see when I move the Y position, it's going to slide left and right. And when I use the X position, it's going to slide left and right in a way that moves against this side. And then the Z, it's going to drop down. So as I drag the Z up, all these guys are going to fall. And this is how we're going to create our effect. What I want to do is I'm going to create a driver here, or I could just set a keyframe, but I'm going to create a driver to make it really procedural. Now the shorthand for that to make a driver is to use the hashtag symbol. So I'm going to go hashtag and I'm going to type in the word frame, which is a built-in variable in Blender that will access the current frame number. So frame number 0 at the moment, and it'll count up as we press play. We're going to hit the multiply symbol, the little star, and then I'm going to make this value smaller. I'm going to go 0.01, let's say, because we need to slow down this movement. Because watch, if I just do hashtag frame, right, and I press play, it's moving so quick, it just feels like noise. So if I click on this, it'll let me edit the driver by adding more information. So we're going to multiply this, and we're going to say, let's say 0.1 to start with. So let's see what that looks like. All right, it's falling slower, but it's still too fast. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to add in another 0 after the point. And that feels a lot better. So it's got that nice slow drift to it. Now I also might want it to move, kind of like drift like on the wind. So I could add another one here, for example. So I go hashtag frame. And I probably want this to go even slower. So 0.001. We'll see how that goes. Yeah, that's going to create a nice little drift. So now it's falling, but it still doesn't feel like snow. It's not really evolving or changing. And how are we going to do that? Well, one thing that we can do is we can change the path that it's going down by distorting these UVs, right? So the way we could do that is actually mix in some random values into the mapping vector. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to create another noise texture. Now, we're going to use a special node here called the mix color node. And this is usually for mixing color, but it works with any set of 3 numbers. So usually color is looking for red, green, and blue, and alpha, so 4, I guess, but mostly it's the red, green, and blue. And you can mix those colors. But we've got 3 numbers here as well, the X, Y, and Z values, right? The X, Y, and Z position. So we can take those values and pipe them into this and mix them with other values using a mix color mode. It works very similarly to if we use like a vector math node or something, right? So I can drop this here, and I'm going to turn the factor down to 0, and then I'm going to plug this factor into it here. And what we're going to do to begin with, actually, before we even look at all this, let me just plug this straight into the material output so we can, again, just look at this surface. So I'm going to turn the scale right down. We've got this gray, black, and white pattern, and I'm going to turn up distortion. Distortion does this really cool twisty effect. And just by putting a little bit in, we get this shape. So now if you can imagine this black and white image being a distortion of the sort of flat space that this texture is going to go on. That's the idea, basically, of what's happening here. And we just want to do this just the tiniest bit. So you see, as I move this up, if I hold down Shift, it's distorting the shape of things. We're going to just bring it up just a little bit, maybe to 0.02. And you can see immediately what it does is it creates this feeling that these little flakes are actually flipping and moving as they fall. Let's turn the scale down. I'm going to turn it down to maybe 2. Now, what we can do with this is we've basically created the feel that we're going for. So let's use this to drive a shader. So I'm going to take this out of the surface material input, and I'm going to plug it right in here. And instead of using the base color, I'm going to plug this into the alpha. Now, if you're not familiar with what alpha channel is, the alpha channel is basically transparency of a shader. So not transparency like glass, where you can, refract light, or like the way water creates, what's it called? Caustics, right? This is different. Transparency in alpha, it's just straight up like fading something off. So there's no physical property of light to it. Now, what you can do with alpha is you can create cutouts and interesting shapes and put holes into things with using a shader, or in this case, cut out everything except for the snow. And the way alpha works is it looks at 0 and 1 values. So wherever you have a value of 1, you'll have no transparency whatsoever. It's fully opaque. Wherever you have black or 0, it's going to be fully transparent and invisible. And of course, that's how our shader is set up. We've got black for everywhere we don't want the snow, and the white is where we want snow. So by using this to drive the alpha, it's actually making this transparent in every place where we want it to be, right? So now we have these values that we can change the surface of the snow to do different types of things. We can keep a base color, for example, white. We can turn the roughness up to make it really reflective, or make it really opaque. And you can do things like turning up metallic to get little glints and stuff to your snow, which can be quite cool as well, depending on the look you're going for. It's going to be a little bit hard to see without the HDRI, so I'm going to turn the world opacity up so we can see that. Anyways, I am not going to use metallic. I'm just going to keep it fully rough. Okay, so now what we can do is we can use the factor here of our mix to change the chaos of the snow as it falls. Likewise, we can change the scale of this noise texture as well to change the size of the chaos. So we could really turn this up to get a lot more flipping. And now it's beginning to look a little bit more like confetti, for example. And that's one of the cool things about this effect is you can use it to create a lot of different styles. So I'm going to bring these really close. There's not much fall off. So these things feel a bit more solid. And then I'm going to take my detail maybe down to 0. And in fact, what we could do is we just make these, cut these off even more with the black. And now it really looks like kind of like a confetti thing, right? We could turn the metallic up for this and turn the roughness down. And now it's going to reflect the environment really well. And we've got this really cool confetti effect. We could turn up the scale to get even more confetti in there. What I like about this effect too is that I can stack it. So I can take this cube, right? And then Shift D and Y and pull it back. And now I've got multiples and I can pull it in. But now one problem we're going to have with this, and I'll put this back up to white so we can see, is that using duplicates, I don't know if you can actually see this. I'll duplicate it again and again and again. You can kind of, you should be able to see the pattern developing, right? But the problem is it's the same noise pattern over and over again. So you're ending up with these lines and they're staying in sync, right? Which, you know, is kind of a cool effect in itself. But we want this effect to be different based on where it is in 3D space. So how could you change a shader to change based on where it's positioned? Well, what we can do is we can evolve this noise texture. We can switch it from 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions. Now we get this new value called W. Everything else stays the same. But the W value basically changes. It's like a seed, basically. It changes the shape of the pattern. And what it is moving this noise through a 4th dimension, right? So it creates this extra level of undulation. And we can use this to basically evolve the pattern. Now we want to change this number based on the location of our object. So let's press play here. So you can see if I change the W, like the whole thing changes, it evolves. So let's take this and if you just grab this and pull it up, right? We can let go and now type in location, and that will grab the object info node location output. So if I hit return, you can see it grabs the object info node, there it is, and it's taking the location. So now it's going to take the location of the individual object that the material is assigned to, which is different. Each of these is a different object, right? So we get a different location for each one, which will input a different W value, which will basically change the seed. So now you can see I've got all of this falling confetti and none of it matches. I hope you have fun using it in your own projects. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and check out the Patreon where you can get access to this project file along with the uncut version of this tutorial. I always jump into a lot of extra detail and talk about a lot of stuff that hits the cutting room floor. So if you're interested in seeing that, you can head over there. You can also join on YouTube at the All Access Pass level and higher to get access to that content here as well. But head over to Patreon for project files. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you had a fantastic week. Special thanks to everybody who supports this channel already on Patreon and on YouTube. Really appreciate all of you. And thank you to you for watching all the way to the end. Really appreciate that as well. I'll catch you in the next tutorial. Until then, have a fantastic week. See you later.